I think that we're missing in South Africa at the present is that bold leadership to reimagine, which is why we keep recycling the same actors.
We also must be mindful of the fact that governance is actually collapsing in the country. And maybe one of the compelling questions that we really need to come up with here today is, as citizens, what is it that we do?
There is no society that can reach its potential as long as women are discriminated against.
Because one of the biggest tragedies, I think, that the dialogue convention, all of the drama displayed, is just the complete immaturity of our governing elite in not being able to get to people with each other's phone numbers, not being able to get it together. When we had spoken about how you were going to focus on today and the 3 points, and I think that it's such an important thing. I want to I repeat them. Firstly, this idea of Tambo as a radical critic. The second, the idea of him as a radical builder and lawgiver. The third, then, him as a statesman and IR actor. I think, the frame, firstly, that the framing of Tambo's leadership within those three frames, I think is such a critical one. Because we learn about him very much in relation to the ANC as a movement and his role in keeping the ANC in exile together, longest president, etc. And then that kind of ends his story once 1994 starts, Tambo's story ends. And I think that what you have done with this lecture is reframe him and recenter him into the imagination, the shaping of the South Africa that we have today, and how critical that role of building, of imagining the after was in the leadership of the ANC in exile. Because we don't, and this is something that I think we are missing in the conversation of crisis that we're having now, both in South Africa but globally. The old world is ending, the new is not yet born. As Zizek would say, this isn't a Gramsci. So the Gramsci quote is, the old world is ending, the new is not yet born. And then Zizek adds, now is the time for monsters. And we're so obsessed with the time for monsters that we're not thinking about the fact that this time, this mess, is the time for imagining of what comes next. That the new world is not just born, it's conceived. It's created, it's imagined. And I think that what you've reminded us so critically of is the role of ethical leadership in guiding our imagining. And I think that's really important. I think that that's the first big takeaway that I want to highlight from your contribution, because what I think that we're missing in South Africa at the present is that bold leadership to reimagine, which is why we keep recycling the same actors. So Auntie Helen's going to be the mayor of Joburg. To fix it. It's the same people that we keep recycling in this imagination of ours, and the same solutions for a radically changed and different world. And so the reminder to imagine boldly, to imagine radically, I think is a very important one. The second point that I want to make is a somewhat more controversial one, and that deviates slightly. Is that in as much as, and I agree, that Tambo was a radical critic who criticized very forcefully and with great moral authority the apartheid regime, he was also a really powerful bridge builder. And I guess this isn't really a critique more than a quibble that although he had a very strong moral stance and criticism of the apartheid regime, he dealt with criticism within the ANC in really constructive ways, and ways of dealing with criticism that I think we've lost in this country under democracy, both within the kind of the big part, you can't really call the governing party anymore because it's not governing on its own, but within the ANC, but I think just in our body politic as a whole. Because one of the biggest tragedies, I think, that the dialogue, convention, all of the drama displayed, is just the complete immaturity of our governing elite, past and present, in not being able to get to people with each other's phone numbers, not being able to get it together to fight out whatever it is you need to fight out, and pull yourselves together to organize, to lead society. It's extraordinary to me, and I don't think that we've probed that enough. How much the mess of the beginning of this dialogue, whether you agree with dialogues or not, is a deep elite failure. And that should terrify all of us. Because if the people with elite, if the elites of the country who are the leaders of the state, of different civil society groupings, of business, of the church, could not get it together to negotiate over the putting on of an event, that's terrifying. And in preparation for this lecture, I went back to read what Chris Hani said about Tambo. Because Hani, in the 1960s, given the failures and really being left in the lurch of MK soldiers, in a number of missions over the border, in Rhodesia trying to get into South Africa, led a group of young MK soldiers in deep criticism against the leadership of the ANC. And he said, and I quote, "We blurted out, we blew our tops, and some leaders got angry. I think people generally were not used to being criticized. They thought that we were going to just applaud everything that they did and say hallelujah. I think the leadership at the time was not ready for criticism." But then he talks about how Tambo was different to that. He had no inferiority complex. He never felt that he was being abused or his dignity was being impugned or that he was being attacked. He felt that he was leading a movement, and he remained there as a leader by being an interpreter, an implementer of collective decisions, decisions which came from a number of levels throughout the movement. He goes on to talk about how when he was a young soldier in Tanzania initially, and then in Zambia, that OR Tambo spent a lot of time in the camps of MK so he could actually understand the problems of the army. So he spent a lot of time speaking to his own rank and file and taking their views, their opinions, and shaping the action and the decisiveness that he then would show. And that ability of leaders to listen to what they hear from the lowest, from the most lowly among them, and to actually be influenced by what they hear, to act in the interest of the collective, is something that's sorely missing in our body politic today. And that I think that, so much of the provocation that you've given us, Sizwe, to have a national action. Part of having the national action is that we don't have leaders that can listen and that can take advice for what that action should be. So the dialoguing is a necessary thing. What's missing is that step from the dialogue, between the dialogue and the action of interpreting, of integrating, and of bringing together all of what comes together into then a collective action. And that important role of leadership that Oliver Tambo showed so incredibly and just demonstrated in ways that even his critics admired throughout his long leadership of the ANC is something that's sorely missing today. And then finally, I want to say that his role as a statesman, I wrote my doctorate, I wrote my PhD on South Africa's time in the UN Security Council, its first 2 elected terms after 1994. And the first research visit I made to the UN, I met a number of older UN Secretariat staffers who knew Tambo and who spoke so highly of him as being one of the best diplomats they'd ever engaged with as Secretariat staffers of the UN, even though he did not hold an official diplomatic position as the leader of a liberation movement at the UN, and who praised the leadership that he displayed in so many of the tough negotiations that they were involved in, not as somebody who represented a government, but as somebody who represented a people. And I think what's the big lesson, I think, to take, and that I take as an international relations scholar from Tambo's internationalism, is that we're going to reshape the international or the global. I don't think the term international is going to make sense in a few years, but that we're going to reshape the world through people-to-people relations and people's ability to engage with each other and to engage with governments as people, rather than through these big state institutions. Because it's those very state institutions whose logics are unjust and that recreate these poles and this bipolarity instead of being able to operate within the multipolar. And so there is something, I think, that was a really useful reminder about the kind of diplomacy, the kind of approach to the world that is required at this moment. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Thabo Makwakwa. And I must disclose, just before I begin with the discussion here, that, you know, I would usually be sitting the other side, having to actually observe and, of course, make notes of what these amazing speakers are saying. And today, I am right here, having to speak after the great minds that actually spoke right now. It is frightening, I must say. Yeah, but as a journalist, I think it is befitting of me to begin by stating the fact that it is such an honor, a privilege to speak here this afternoon, this evening. And I know very well that colleagues in other parts of the world do not enjoy the freedom of having to sit in front of the masses and actually reflect on issues that are happening around the world. I'm speaking of Gaza, for example, where we are actually, you know, observing an extermination of people, a whole population of 2 million that is under threat. We need not to forget those people. And as just Dr. Mpofu-Walsh was speaking here, he said to us, he reminded us of how good and, you know, Oliver Tambo was such a leader, a radical one for that matter, who was not really scared of confronting issues that are facing our world. He did so using various ways of actually reaching out to people. Mpofu-Walsh reminds us that while leading in exile, he was able to actually bring together people from different parts of the world in trying to find solutions into our world. And I think this discussion today sort of brings us very close to such integrity that was displayed by OR Tambo in ensuring that the world becomes a better place in which we can all live and exist peacefully. My take from this discussion today is very important as a young person, as a young person, a young leader, a writer, a person who carries the voices of the masses, because it is important to teach the legacy of OR Tambo in a true way that it is, in a true way that also reflect the sacrifices that Tambo actually did in order to make sure that we get to enjoy and sit here and, be part and parcel of this democracy. We also must be mindful of the fact that governance is actually collapsing in the country. And maybe one of the compelling questions that we really need to come up with here today is, as citizens, what is it that we're doing? Are we just sitting by, watching government officials doing as they please? Of course, we're not politicians, but we're people with brains. We can think, we have voices. And I'm very glad today that one of my mentors, who actually taught me to be as radical as I was when I was still young, and I would like to believe that even in my career as a journalist, I still try to ensure that a bit of radicalism is brought into journalism, because as a young person, as a young leader, we cannot be afraid to speak about the issues that are going on. The judiciary is collapsing. And it pains me today when I have to sit here in front of you speaking, because then I'm also very careful and, how I structure the conversation, because it may be used against me when I write an article in the future. However, it really pains me today to actually see corruption that is so rife, and that even when a whistleblower comes forward, there is nothing that can be done. Because the very same people that are entrusted with processes, with ensuring that independent oversight is also carried out, are somewhat involved. Now, that compelling question comes back again. What would have Tambo done today? How would he have acted when the world is becoming what it is today? So it is important for us to actually have these ongoing discussions, reflecting on the lives and the life and times of Oliver Tambo, and draw lessons as to what is it that we can take and learn from him in order to fix our world. Yesterday I was attending a memorial lecture, an annual memorial lecture hosted at UJ, and Dr. Naledi Pandey was the speaker. She then challenges us during the talk that we need to start shifting our mindset. She says to us, we need to start thinking, of course, in line with how and what the world looks like today. But that doesn't mean that we should actually, forget our principles that have kept us together, that have built this democracy, that have united the world. It means that we need to look back at Tambo and say, what would he have done? Tambo, as a teacher, as a lawyer, as a politician, was able to actually go everywhere, speak to everyone, things that we ought to do today. So being invited here today really gives me a pleasure to come and share my thoughts, and also to thank Dr. Mpofu-Walsh for that very moving lecture. It was not just a lecture, it was a masterclass. Thank you very much.
Kamakwini, Thokozani. Before I roast the young man I call Uhlubi for his excellent lecture, let me start by thanking Liana, who started by telling us how beautiful we look. Thank you, Liana, for complimenting me on my dress. Then I have advice for Dr. Nodia. who we are told is a runner. I have two things to say to Dr. Nadir. First of all, show a bit more confidence in public transport. Secondly, advice on exercise, Dr. Nadir. When you feel the urge to exercise, lie down until it passes and you'll be fine. Hlubi, thank you. Siyabulela for your excellent lecture. I am certain, Nogokba, Tatomkhulu, your grandfather, and those he is with, uthembekile. Nomakhulu wakho, uMamdolo, and those she is with are very proud of you, where they are. Hlubi, you call him Caesar, I call him Hlubi. He's a young man I respect quite deeply. And as an older member of the Gen Z generation, a young man that I've learned a lot from over the years, since I started engaging with him in 2019. He is a young man I have become very proud of. Siyabulela Hlubi. And then uMakhumalo. Siyabulela Makhumalo. Umakhumalo herself is a young woman I am very proud of, given the fact that the first time I met Umakhumalo, I was in the Premier's office in the strategy unit, and we worked with her father, who called himself, and therefore we called him Ogogo. And Umakhumalo was this tall in those days. And here we are on the same panel. Isabulela Makhumalo. And then Thabo, here next to me. The last time I saw him, he had come to interview me for an episode of their podcast, Inside Factor. And I remember that what trended after that episode was posted is what I predicted, the coming of fires in South Africa and what they would mean. And of course, Hlubi talks about Oliver Tambo, referring to the cleansing fire of revolution. But before I get into the roast proper, my wife asked me to apologize right at the beginning, before I start. As a strong African man, I will not disobey her. So here's my apology. I am going to say things that may offend some of us. Let me assure you, it is not my intention to offend. That said, Because we are at a university, I am going to try to sound clever. But before I make that attempt, there can be no justice because Uhlubi, in his lecture, talks about Tambo's leadership legacy as a legacy of justice. There can be no justice in any society in which more than half of the population is discriminated against. I am talking about women. There is no society that can reach its potential as long as women are discriminated against. Therefore, there is no society, including ours, that can reach its leadership potential when women are discriminated against. Because it means, as a society, we rely on a smaller or on a small portion of the population as the source of our leadership. And therefore, we are not going to reach our leadership potential as long as women are discriminated against. Therefore, when we think about the future of leadership in this country, and when we think about the leadership legacy of OR Tambo, it cannot be that we do so without acknowledging the leadership potential that is locked in the act of discriminating against women. Now, one of the things I do when I listen to a lecture is to ask whether such a lecture ignites in me, triggers in me, thoughts that are not in the lecture itself. And if such a lecture triggers thoughts that are not in the lecture itself, to me, that is a sign that the lecture was excellent. And so was the case with the lecture delivered by Uhlubi today. Here are some of the thoughts Uhlubi triggered in me. Uhlubi talks about Tambo's constitution and reads the preamble of Tambo's constitution. And the thought Uhlubi triggered in me is that we must commit ourselves as a country to revisiting and rewriting our constitution after every generation. That is the first thought triggered by Uhlubi in me. Secondly, he takes me back to the colonial matrix of power. Two things underpin the colonial matrix of power: racism and patriarchy. Now remember that the colonial matrix of power is buttressed by a particular logic, a logic we refer to as coloniality. A logic which says those who are not white men are ontologically and epistemologically inferior. Those who are not white men are those who are black and those who are women. Now, of course, there's a hierarchy here. At the top of the hierarchy is God. Below God, the white man. Below the white man, the black man. And right at the bottom, the black woman. But what the white woman and the black woman share in common is that according to the logic of coloniality, which buttresses the colonial matrix of power, is the fact that both black and white women are not human. Or, to the extent that they are human, they are not as human as men, black or white. Another thought that Uhlubi triggered in me is that I should remind you that the struggle against apartheid colonialism was not a struggle for democracy, particularly liberal democracy. The struggle against apartheid colonialism was a struggle for freedom. And democracy is one of the means by which we achieve freedom. Furthermore, the struggle was a struggle aimed at rehumanizing those who were dehumanized by apartheid colonialism. When it comes to women and what we have done to them, the struggle was a struggle to humanize, not even to rehumanize them, to humanize them, given the fact that at no point in history have we regarded women as human, or have we treated them as human. To the extent that the struggle continues, it is a struggle about humanizing women. And one of the ways in which we must humanize them is to make sure that the content of what we call justice must include the imperative of making sure that the leadership we need in this society must be leadership that we source from and resides in those who are women. The final thought that Uhlubi triggered in me is this. Ubuntu. There is a need to reconceptualize Ubuntu, which is a quality that OR Tambo had in abundance, which is a quality that informed his radical vision for this country. But it's a quality that we must reconceptualize. Ubuntu must not just mean you are, or I am because you are. We must extend that to nature too, which means you look at a tree, you look at a plant, you look at an animal, and you extend Ubuntu to it, and you say, I am because you are. And therefore, our idea and practice of leadership must be rooted in that kind of reconceptualized Ubuntu as something that you extend not only to those who are human, you extend to nature and beyond. Because you say to nature, I am because you are. Lastly, history is a ceaseless repetition of error, folly, and correction. Therefore, history is a ceaseless repetition of the errors and folly of men. It is high time that we commit ourselves to the emergence of leadership in our society that will come from women. We must honor the legacy of Oliver Tambo by saying all of us must embrace the feminine. Embrace the feminine divine wisdom. Meaning, as we see the emergence of a new consciousness on our planet and beyond, it is time to allow ourselves to be led by those amongst us who are women, and give ourselves the opportunity to benefit from the divine feminine wisdom. Therefore, the 21st century, we must declare, is the century of the woman and her leadership, is the century of the divine feminine wisdom. This we must do in honor of Oliver Tambo's legacy. Kamako.
My profound thanks to all the panelists for stimulating interventions and extending on the provocation. I remind the audience that this is also going to be released on the SMWX podcast. Thabo, maybe we should dual release it on Insight Factor as well. So now we're going to ask if anyone in the audience has a question or a comment. I watched a recent panel that I thought was really interesting. The author Teju Cole was on the panel and he said, it's okay to make a comment as well. You don't just have to ask a question. However, please keep it relatively brief so that we can accommodate a few different people if you have something to say. So we're opening it up to the audience, and you can make a comment or a question. Then what we're going to do, because we appreciate that you've all been attentive for a very long time, is we will all just take 1 or 2 minutes to give our thoughts on the comments or questions that have been made. The floor is open. I believe there was a question on that side. This young person? Yes, I believe so. Over here. Yes. And let's start with those two then. Is there a mic to Rove?
Thank you. My name is Lufunoti Chikarange. I'm originally from a village in Venda, but I'm stuck in Pretoria because I need to work. Thank you so much, Dr. Mpofu-Walsh, for your thought-provoking lecture. I honestly didn't know much about Oliver Tambo until today, and I'm wondering where I will be doing my PhD research on some of his constitutionalism. I want to agree with you. Personally, I don't think that the national dialogue will bring us much assistance. And I'm wondering if this forum has the authority to make suggestions or recommendations to the powers that be, because I just think that the minimum resources we have are not necessarily being used appropriately. It's not like we don't know what's wrong, and we don't need almost R1 billion to confirm what we already know is confirmed. My question is, in terms of ethical leadership, Mr. Thabo did say our, I think governance is collapsing. No, it has collapsed, and we don't have ethical leadership. So my question is, how do we correct ourselves in line with what Oliver Tambo would have imagined? Thank you. Oh, I forgot to say I am a researcher. I do cyber law at Oreza Consulting. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and hello to the panelists. And my question is more of a question and a comment at the same time, so it's multi-tiered. I think we live in a society where the society itself has eroded a bit, so it's reflective in the leadership as well, because we do not know where we are spearheading the country. In a world that is changing, you have your AIs, you have your additive manufacturing. The foundation of what we call the society we know is being pulled from our feet. So we're in a situation where most of the leadership are old, they don't know what to do, hence the national dialogue to steer the conversation to the people that, hey, you guys are young, you guys know a thing or two about what's emerging, so how are you going to go about defining what the future is and what type of future we want to live in? And since today is about legacy, speaking on Oliver Tambo's legacy, I guess it's a situation of what legacy are we trying to find in leadership, and how are we going to go about crafting a future? Because as one of you guys said, there's high unemployment, high poverty. So to solve those issues, it's more of a wealth thing. How do we build wealth as a country? How do we go from a country that has a GDP of 300 billion to in the north of trillions? So it's about how do we build wealth and how do we define how we build wealth? Because as much as we'd like to say, hey, let's live in a multicultural society, let's love each other, kumbaya, most of the problems that come about is because of resources. And the less resources there are, the less kind we are to each other, the more we are like fighting for a place in society. Thank you.
Good evening. This is Nomaan Duli, the co-program director. I'm also a research student here at UNISA. Thank you so much, Dr. Mpofu-Walsh, for such a thought-provoking lecture. Dr. Sithembile, Thabo, and Gogo, we truly appreciate your inputs as well. My question/comment is directed at Gogo. Dr. Sithembile mentioned something very significant, and I think all of us are aware. Corruption is thriving. It is thriving beautifully, but in a bad way. I mean, if you look at the news and everything, so much wastage, so much corruption, justice is lacking. Even you, Thabo, you mentioned, there's so much injustice. And with you, Gogo, you mentioned something very significant, discrimination. There's so much discrimination, first starting with, the racial issues, gender, disability, and not forgetting ageism. I mean, nowadays we have initiatives, or there are initiatives that are being provided, but if you look at opportunities, this would be for the youth. And it's quite interesting, Dr. Sizwe, you've just gone past the youth. So some opportunities might not be applicable to you. But then how do we fix this? Because there is so much injustice, and the theme for this lecture is about just leadership. How do we fix all of this? Is it fixable? Like looking at, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, what are your thoughts, Gogo, especially from your side? Because, so far it's a very thought-provoking subject. I think for now, let me pack it. Thank you.
Greetings, all protocols observed. My name is Sithembile Mbete, and recently I just turned 18, and on that day, the first thing that I thought was currently adding my name into the percentage of people in South Africa, actually women in South Africa, that are about to be unemployed, that are about to be a hashtag. I feel like that's my most biggest fear, being part of a hashtag in South Africa, either because of gender-based violence or something else could have happened to me out on the streets. And today we are here because of OR Tambo, and I'm getting knowledge about that, stuff I didn't know about. But I just feel like every single year we are getting educated about people and past past leaders of South Africa, and all we ever say is they could have, would have, didn't, and if they were here, they could have, but they didn't because they are not here right now. But we keep on having hope in the future leaders. We had hope on Zuma, but he disappointed us. We are having hope on Ramaphosa, and he's disappointing us. And I feel like we're going to continue having hope and not doing anything about our hope, just continue just taking our votes wherever that they are in the ANC, even though we can see that it's corrupt. And our grandparents are also having hope in a different form. And as women and as a young lady in South Africa, I feel like this country isn't going anywhere. It isn't. We are just sitting and stating facts, but we are doing nothing about it. And it's going to continue like that until the next generation, until we decide to come together, to unite, and to make decisions about our futures together. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the audience. I think that's the last question, and in the interests of time, we probably have to move on. Is there another one? No, I think that's all. Great. Okay. Well, I think in the interests of time, I'm also mindful that we need to stick to the program. Shall we take one more, or shall we? Okay, we'll take one last one. And apologies to this table, but we can always continue the conversations after this as we interact and network. If you could please keep your remarks brief.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Thabo Makwakwa. I am a student of power. Quickly to the question, tonight is a very dangerous night. And it's dangerous because the throw of ideas and the identity of being anacalyptic. Anacalyptic is the process of ideas upon ideas. It's subjective to the praise of the mass community. And my question is, how do we reform the institutionality of thought to spark radical movement as we move in to a new era for our country? I think this is a mass question for the entire panel rather than one particular one. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mazu. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your comments. And of course, we won't have time to go through them exhaustively, but they are part of the overall conversation and discussion that we've had. I'm going to, in the spirit of Oliver Tambo, exercise leadership and be very brief, in the hope that I inspire my fellow panelists to do the same. There's one thing that the conversation tonight reminded me that I didn't add in my speech, and I think it speaks to a lot of what was said. I can't remember where it was, but someone recounts watching Oliver Tambo giving a speech and a tear coming down his eye because things felt so hopeless. And at the time, it just seemed like the ANC wasn't going anywhere and the struggle wasn't going anywhere and the apartheid state was too powerful. And that's kind of where, well, I mean, I would say the hopelessness we feel is probably not even close to the hopelessness Tambo must have felt trying to engage his audience and actually shedding a tear. So it's not hopeless. We can do something. We can pick ourselves up, but we have to start at the root. And we have to really, in my view, ask ourselves questions not just at the margins of policy. Should we go 1 degree to the left or 1 degree to the right? But how do we reconstitute the whole thing? And that, I think, is an imaginative project which we can really dedicate our energy to. And if we do that, history shows we can move forward. There's no law that South Africa has to be in the doldrums forever. So if Tambo could do it, why can't we?
Thank you. I want to end with a couple of statistics and in response to our fresh 18-year-old, happy birthday. And the idea of hope. Last year's election was the first election since 1999 where 18 to 19-year-olds had a lower than 50% turnout. Usually in all of our elections, since we kept a voters' roll, you have a small percentage of 18 to 19-year-olds that actually register to vote. But when they are registered to vote, they turn out at very high numbers. 2009, 73% turned out. 2014, 83% of 18 to 19-year-olds turned out. 2019, 80% of 18 to 19-year-olds turned out. In 2024, it was 45% of registered 18 to 19-year-olds turned out to vote. So of the ones who went and actually registered, and there were 209,000 more registrations of 18 to 19-year-olds in 2024 than there were in 2019, only 45% of them turned out to vote. And I think that is a reflection of that hopelessness and that despair. What I want to say as a counter to it is that this country is going to be saved by AMA 2000. The best thing about the National Convention for me was AMA 2000. At some point, I told the over 50s to shut up. I told them that they'll be dead in 40 years, so they must please give room to the young people. And when people who are over 40, who were alive in 1994, stopped speaking, the conversation turned productive. Because the people who actually have a stake in the future of this country started talking, started doing the reimagining. And so my hope lies in you, and especially lastly in those young women who are afraid of being statistics. Young women vote at all age groups more than men do. We turn out to vote 5 percentage points just about more than men do at every single age group, particularly more at younger age groups, and yet we don't have a political system that reflects that we are the voters, we are the decision makers of this country. And so I guess I'm throwing the mantle to the young people, especially the young women in the room, to say, take it. Old people have no clue what to do. And I count myself in that. I'm over 40, guys. I'm old. Yeah, it'll be shaped by you guys. And you're the ones who are going to save us.
Thank you. I just want to tackle the question on, on what was raised about these activities or platforms rather not really producing the desirable outcomes in terms of coming up with solutions. I think we need to really start somewhere. And we can just start right here by having at least this conversation. What is wrong with our society? What areas of concern do we really need to address? Once we're able to do that, it will be very easy for us, even as young people, to understand the role that is being played by adults. We cannot, in our pursuit for this just democratic country, want to erase the existence or the contribution of adults. In order for us to correct what is presently wrong, we need to be able to reflect in the past. And if you look at the past, that's where you find adults, old people, that really helped shape the world that we live in today. So there is just no way that we're going to have a discussion that does not include old people. As a young man, I need to get, at least some guidance from, the elderly, the adults, everybody that is actually a senior to me. And as I said, when I was actually in the SRC a few years ago, my mentor happens to be, it's not one person, by the way, and I'm glad they're sitting on the same table. Now, I had a great relationship with them. And we would actually get to sit down and discuss various issues. But that did not stop me when the time allowed to actually stand up, mobilize students, shut down the gates if we had to. And we would get arrested. Later on, they would call and make means for us to get us out. The point I'm making is, as young people, we need to dispel the notion that old people cannot really contribute to this. And lastly, we need to understand that we are active players in the society. We have the solutions because this is the world we live in and your children are going to live in this world. So if you do not start today to engage in sittings and forums such as this, chances are you may not even be aware of what is wrong with your country. Maybe the concern would be, why are we constantly hosting these events in places such as this, where the masses of our people are in the townships, in the rural areas, where they have no access to internet. Some of them may not even be able to stream this. We ought to have a discussion as to why is UNISA not going to these remote campuses and have these big events where you attract ordinary community members that are going to come and speak and contribute. Thank you very much.
I suspected that Thabo is wise, given what he has just said about old people. It's no longer a suspicion, it's a fact. If you think of the challenges facing South Africa as a baobab tree, women cannot hug that baobab tree alone. Men cannot hug that baobab tree alone. Young people cannot hug that baobab tree alone. Old people cannot hug that baobab tree alone. What must guide us is the understanding that all of us, united, young people, old people, men and women, all of us united, will be able to hug this baobab tree. But I want to go back before I finish to what I said about women. And this is the part I think I must apologize for, or I was apologizing for. Women have not been treated by us as fully human. In fact, even religious texts tell us that women are a subspecies. Some religious texts will provide evidence or will give us evidence that women are a subspecies by telling us they came from the rib of those who are men. So to look at a woman is to look at a subspecies. Hence, the manner in which we have treated women. Again, there is no way we will be able to hug this baobab tree only on the basis of the leadership of men. And as I said, history has been, so far, has been the ceaseless repetition of the errors and folly of men. In other words, the world and this country are in this crisis because of men. It is time to give women a chance. It is time to give the leadership of women a chance. For me, Hlubi, the response to the challenges that face us must be twofold. One, they must be political. And because they must be political, as we go back to Oliver Tambo's constitution, we must say South Africa belongs to those who conquered it. And that is the reality. Just leadership must change. South Africa belongs to those who conquered it. That is what we must change, amongst other things. Now, as I said, I don't mean to offend. But Hlubi has told us that Oliver Tambo believed in the cleansing fire of revolution. And here I want to address UNISA and other universities directly. In what they teach and how they teach it, our universities, they must make sure that they become, or the minds of those they teach, become the petrol that fans the cleansing fire of revolution. By being the opposite of what Henry Thoreau says about educational institutions. He says educational institutions have become dead zones of disimagination. This we must change if our institution and the minds they teach must become part of that fire, cleansing fire of revolution. Kama Queen.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.